Today is December 2nd, and I am in Special Collections at Marshall University with Lori Thompson, archivist, librarian, and the head of Special Collections. Today we're talking about the Enslow Murder of 1936. So Lori, how did you find out about the murder of Juliet Enslow?
Well, as a person who's not from this area originally, I was helping a student at Marshall conduct some research not so long ago, probably about a year ago, in regards to were there any crimes of Huntington that she could research. And a search of our materials showed that we had some materials of the Juliet Enslow murder.
What do you know specifically about the murder?
Not much, to be honest. The collection that we have is small, and so I do know that Juliet Enslow was married to one of the prominent business people in Huntington. She was widowed, and they lived in a rather large house, and she had a lot of nice things. And that I do know that the murder was unsolved.
How did you guys receive your information about the murder?
One of the collections that we contain in our library are materials from Catherine Bliss Enslow, and she was a relative of Juliet down the line. And Catherine was very interested in local history and her family history, and wrote for the Huntington Advertiser, which later folded into the Herald Dispatch newspaper. And so when she passed away, all of her research materials were donated to the library in the 1970s. So without her maintaining this research of a variety of things, I would not have known about the Enslow murder or about the crimes that were committed during that time.
Would there be any information about the murder outside the libraries?
I'm sure there is. Unfortunately, the murder took place in the 30s. Huntington does not have a historical society, so the Special Collections Department has sort of taken it upon ourselves to collect as much as we can, but unsure of what materials live in the court system, or certainly the Huntington Police Department from the 1930s. They might be buried in somebody's basement or buried in some attic of the city building, but we don't have necessarily a way to find that information easily or to track it down.
Why don't you think that there isn't more information outside the special collections?
I think just due to time. Things get lost to time often. Had we not indexed the Catherine Bliss papers properly, we would have had the keyword murder, which was essentially what the original student was looking up. And because of space and because we don't have a historical society in this region, things get thrown out all the time. So unfortunately, some things are a lot harder to come by decades later.
Do you think that this murder will ever be solved?
I would like to think now that we have technology like digital forensics or the CSI type stuff, it would be kind of cool to see if there was any evidence left still in Huntington for any reason in an evidence locker or something that maybe a enterprising forensic student might be able to do some DNA analysis or maybe some new computer technology that would be able to better paint a picture of the murder. I doubt that it's going to be prominent enough for someone to do that, but every day there are new podcasts and new researchers out there who are trying to uncover these things. So maybe somebody would take an interest in that and maybe find out the answers.
Juliet Enslow, also known as Juliet Buffington, was an icon of the Huntington Society. Raised by her father, who was the first mayor, and the granddaughter that was Cabell County's first surveyor, her great-grandfather, Thomas Buffington, was one of the first settlers in this region. Her roots grew deep in this area. Frank B. Enslow, Juliet's husband, regarded as one of the most influential men in West Virginia. Frank Enslow became a notable figure in business and civic affairs during Huntington's early decades. A lawyer by profession, Enslow was a director and later president of the Huntington National Bank. He was Huntington's first millionaire. Prior to his death in 1917, he spent most of his career engaged in Huntington's oil and gas development. He also owned extensive properties in Huntington. Enslow's many businesses interests made him an extremely wealthy man in this era, before income taxes. During the 1890s, he used some of his wealth to build one of the city's most elegant homes. With 27 rooms, marble fireplaces, Tiffany fixtures, and stained glass windows, the Enslow home was the center of Huntington's social life. Parties frequently were given in the mansion for the city's affluent citizens. Frank Enslow's first wife, Julia, was a niece of Juliet Buffington, and they had one son, Frank Enslow, Jr., before Julia died in 1897. He then married Juliet in 1903, and they had a daughter, Dorothy. Miss Enslow had a son from her first marriage, Charles B. Baldwin, who was 41 at the time of her death. At some time between 12:30 Friday night and 8:30 Saturday morning, October 17th, Miss Enslow was stabbed in the head with a finely pointed instrument, beat around the face and body, and possibly strangled with a towel found loosely knotted around her throat. The time of death was placed between 2 and 4 a.m. Bruises around the face and mouth were taken into indication that Miss Enslow had been choked. 5 wounds inflicted by sharp instrument, thought to have been an ice pick, were found on her forehead, and there were 4 similar wounds on one of her hands. Valuable diamond rings and diamond-studded wristwatch that Miss Enslow usually wore to bed at night were missing. The wristwatch later was found in the drawer in her room. Later, a billfold belonging to Miss Enslow was found in the driveway by a chauffeur when he came early Saturday morning. The housekeeper rushed to her employer's suite of the room where she discovered her body and then called the police. There was an absence of fingerprints or marks on the windowsill of the Enslow mansion or the wooden posts supporting the window to indicate that anyone had entered or left the home by the window. That night, her son Charles had 3 visitors over and played bridge in the parlor. Police soon ruled out burglary as the motive and worked on the assumption that it had been an inside job. To support this theory, there was the fact that the billfold was found by the chauffeur was dry, although it had rained the night and the morning of. The police found this to be a crucial piece of evidence that had been planted. On October 27, 1936, 10 days after her murder, Enslow's son, Charles B. Baldwin, a former practicing lawyer, was arraigned on the charge of homicide. Court records show that on February 18, 1937, Baldwin was formally indicted by the grand jury for the Enslow murder. After a jury trial and common plea court, he was found not guilty of the murder charge on March 25, 1937. This sensational murder case remained dormant until almost 3 years later. On February 22, 1940, a new development in the Enslow case was reported by the Herald-Dispatch in front-page headlines. This was the discovery of one of the 2 valuable diamond rings that had disappeared in connection with the murder. The ring was found by a City Street Department employee in the catch basin in the alley behind the Enslow home and a short distance east of the rear entrance of the property. Many Huntingtons were skeptical that the diamond ring had remained in the sewer lines for 4 years and had not been washed away by the 1937 flood. The ring was described as a large diamond in a platinum setting with a black mounting. Despite the discovery of the missing gem, there was no indication that this baffling case was reopened by the police. The Enslow mansion later was sold and for many years was the site of the Steele Funeral Home. In 1965, a Ray Black bought the funeral home and later changed its name to Steele Black. He and his wife lived on the home's second floor and barely escaped with their own lives when a fast-moving fire broke out in the basement. Firefighters had little luck battling the blaze, which eventually gutted the landmark structure. The burned-out ruins were cleared away the next year. Today, the property is home to a used car lot. So who killed Juliet Buffington Enslow? Was it her son? At the time of the murder, he was not practicing law and was living with his mother. He was short on funds and couldn't wait for the inheritance. I'm sure he was going to have to share with Frank Jr. and Dorothy? Was Lizzie an accomplice? Was she more than just a housekeeper to Charles? Did one of Charles's guests murder her? Unfortunately, these questions will never be answered. I believe someone knew the truth, someone with access to the stolen rings, maybe someone that wanted absolution for their crimes. We will never know. More than 60 years later, mystery still surrounds the brutal bedroom murder of Miss Juliet B. Enslow.